Hey there, I'm Nathan Carter, and let me tell you about the day my so-called perfect life in Portland, Oregon started to crumble right in front of me. At 42, I thought I had it all figured out. A solid career as a software engineer, a beautiful home in the suburbs, and a wife I'd loved for 15 years. But that morning, as I stood in my kitchen, staring at the steam rising from my coffee, I felt a knot in my gut that wouldn't go away. Something was wrong, and I was about to find out just how deep the cracks in my foundation had grown. It was a foggy October morning in Portland, the kind where the air feels heavy and the city looks like it's hiding secrets under a gray blanket. I was up early, like I always am, brewing a pot of Pete's coffee in our modern kitchen. The space was straight out of a home design catalog: sleek granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and a big window overlooking the backyard where I'd once planned to build a treehouse for the kids we never had. I'd spent years turning this house into a home, a place where I thought Lauren and I could grow old together. At 42, I wasn't just any guy. I was a software engineer who'd poured my heart into my work. My app, TaskFlow, a project management tool I'd built from scratch, was on the verge of a major breakthrough. A Silicon Valley firm had reached out a week earlier, hinting at a buyout offer that could be worth millions. I should have been on top of the world, sipping my coffee and dreaming about the future. But instead, I stood there, the ceramic mug warming my hands, staring at the empty chair where Lauren usually sat. Lauren, my wife of 15 years, was 39, a stunning brunette with a sharp mind and a smile that could light up a room, or so I'd always thought. She ran her own event planning business, always bustling with energy, coordinating weddings and corporate gigs with a kind of effortless charm. That morning, she came down the stairs, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, dressed in a navy blazer and a pencil skirt that hugged her curves. "Morning, babe," she said, her voice light, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She grabbed a to-go cup from the cabinet, poured herself some coffee, and started scrolling through her phone, her fingers moving fast across the screen. I watched her, trying to ignore the faint scent of cologne that lingered in the air, a musky, unfamiliar smell that definitely wasn't mine. I'd noticed it before, over the past few months, but I'd chalked it up to her being around clients all day. Event planners meet a lot of people, right? That's what I told myself. But that morning, something about her felt off. I'm not the kind of guy who jumps to conclusions. I'm a problem solver, the type who spends hours debugging code at 2 a.m. until every line is perfect. I don't like drama, and I've never been one to pick a fight. But as Lauren stood there, her back to me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "Hey, Lauren," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I got an email from the bank this morning. There's been some weird activity on our joint account." I paused, watching her closely. 20 grand withdrawn over the past 3 months. $400, $1,000, $1,800, $3,000. You know anything about that? She froze for a split second, her fingers hovering over her phone, before turning to face me with a laugh that sounded too sharp, too forced. "Oh, Nathan, you're always so worried about the details," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "It's just some event expenses. You know how it is. Clients can be demanding, and I had to front some costs. I'll get reimbursed soon." Her eyes darted to the side just for a moment, but it was enough. I'd known Lauren for 15 years, and I could tell when she was hiding something. That quick glance, the way her smile tightened at the corners. It was the same look she'd had years ago when she'd forgotten to tell me about a speeding ticket. But this wasn't a speeding ticket. This was $20,000 of our money, and she was lying to my face. I took a sip of my coffee, the bitter taste matching the feeling in my chest. 20 grand, Lauren," I said, my voice low. "That's not chump change. You didn't think to tell me?" She set her cup down, her movements a little too careful, and turned to me with a sigh. "Nathan, you're overreacting. It's just business. I've got it under control." She grabbed her purse, slung it over her shoulder, and flashed another smile, this one colder, more practiced. "I've got a meeting downtown. I'll see you tonight, okay?" I nodded, but as the front door clicked shut behind her, I stood there, staring at the empty kitchen. The house felt too big, too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your chest. I walked over to the window, watching her car pull out of the driveway and disappear into the fog. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, just like the life I thought I knew. I'd trusted Lauren with everything: our money, our home, our future. But that look in her eyes, that scent of cologne, those withdrawals, they were pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. Because deep down, I knew that once I started digging, I might not like what I found. I set the mug down and opened my laptop, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I'm a man who fixes things, code, systems, problems, and right now, I had a problem that needed fixing. I logged into our bank account, scrolling through the transactions, each one a little stab in my gut. I whispered to myself, I'll find out what you're hiding, Lauren, and if you're playing me for a fool, I'll make sure you regret it. The fog hadn't lifted by the time I sat down in my home office that evening, the glow of my laptop screen casting a pale light across the room. Lauren had texted me earlier saying she'd be late again, another client meeting that would probably stretch past midnight. I'd stopped counting how many times I'd heard that excuse over the past few months. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that makes your thoughts scream louder than you'd like. I couldn't get her words from that morning out of my head. It's just business, Nathan. But the way her eyes had darted away, the way her voice had trembled just slightly, it wasn't just business. I knew it in my bones, and I was done ignoring the signs. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight, and stared at the bank transactions on the screen. 20 grand siphoned off in chunks, $400 here, $1,000 there, $1,800, $3,000, all to an account I didn't recognize. I'm a software engineer, not a financial wizard, but I know how to trace a digital footprint. I cross-referenced the account number with our past statements, and my stomach dropped when I saw the pattern. The withdrawal started 3 months ago, right around the time Lauren began taking more business trips to Seattle. She'd come back from those trips with a glow I hadn't seen in years, her laughter brighter, her touch softer, but always with that faint scent of cologne that wasn't mine. I'd told myself it was nothing, that I was being paranoid. But now, staring at the numbers, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. I grabbed my phone and opened the security app for our home cameras. We'd installed them last year after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. Nothing fancy, just a few motion-activated cameras in the living room and garage. I scrolled through the footage from the past week, my thumb hovering over the play button. Part of me didn't want to look. Part of me already knew what I'd find. But I hit play anyway. And there it was, Lauren, 2 nights ago, slipping into the house at 1 a.m. She wasn't alone. A man followed her in, his arm around her waist, his laugh echoing through the grainy audio. I couldn't see his face clearly. He kept his back to the camera, but I didn't need to. I recognized the leather jacket, the broad shoulders, the way he moved. It was Derek, my best friend since college, the guy who'd been my best man at our wedding, the guy I'd trusted with my life. My hands shook as I paused the footage, the image frozen on Lauren's smile as she looked up at him. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, the air sucked out of my lungs. Derek, of all people. We'd met at Oregon State, bonded over late-night coding sessions and cheap beer. He'd been there through every milestone, my first job, my engagement to Lauren, the launch of TaskFlow. He'd even helped me pitch the app to investors last year, cheering me on when Silicon Valley came knocking. And now, here he was, in my house, with my wife, while I was out of town on a work trip. The betrayal hit me like a freight train, a mix of rage and grief so raw I could barely breathe. I stood up, pacing the room, my boots thudding against the hardwood floor. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air thick with the scent of betrayal. I grabbed a glass from the shelf and poured myself a shot of bourbon from the bottle I kept for late-night coding marathons. The amber liquid burned as it went down, but it didn't dull the pain. I kept replaying the footage in my mind. Lauren's smile, Derek's laugh, the way they moved together like they'd done this 100 times before. How long had this been going on? How many times had I sat across from Derek at our favorite bar, talking about my dreams for TaskFlow while he was plotting behind my back? I sat back down, my hands still trembling, and opened Lauren's laptop. She'd left it on the desk, the screen unlocked, a rare slip-up for someone who'd been so careful lately. I didn't even have to dig far. Her email was open, and there, in her inbox, was a message from Derek, sent just yesterday. "We're almost there, babe," it read. "Once we get the app, we can start over in California. He'll never see it coming." My blood ran cold. The app. TaskFlow. They weren't just after our money. They wanted my life's work, the one thing I'd poured my heart into. I scrolled further, finding more emails, plans to meet at a cabin in the woods, discussions about how to handle me during the divorce. They were planning to take everything and leave me with nothing. I slammed the laptop shut, my chest heaving. The bourbon glass sat empty on the desk, the bottle tempting me to pour another, but I didn't. I needed a clear head. I'm not the kind of guy who breaks down. I'm the guy who builds things, who fixes things. And right now, I had a problem to fix. I thought about confronting Lauren when she got home, about calling Derek and demanding answers. But I stopped myself. They thought I was clueless, that I'd roll over and let them take everything. They were wrong. I opened my own laptop and started digging deeper into the bank transactions, tracing the account they'd been funneling money into. It was linked to a small LLC in Seattle, one I didn't recognize, but I bet my last dollar Derek was behind it. I also pulled up the security footage again, saving a copy to a USB drive. Evidence. I'd need it. I wasn't sure what my next move was, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let them win. I leaned back in my chair, the room dark except for the glow of the screen, and whispered to myself, "You think you can play me, Lauren? You and Derek are in for a rude awakening." The next morning, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the bedroom window, a steady rhythm that matched the pounding in my chest. I hadn't slept much, maybe an hour if that. The image of Lauren and Derek on the security footage kept playing in my mind, a loop I couldn't escape. My best friend and my wife, plotting to take everything I'd built. I rolled over, staring at the empty side of the bed where Lauren should have been. She'd come home late again, slipping in around 3 a.m., her heels clicking softly as she tiptoed past the bedroom. I'd pretended to be asleep, but I'd heard her humming to herself, a carefree tune that made my blood boil. She thought she had me fooled. She thought I was the same trusting Nathan who'd never question her. She was wrong. I got up, the hardwood floor cold against my bare feet, and headed downstairs to the kitchen. The house felt different now, like a battlefield I had to navigate carefully. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, the bitter aroma filling the air, and sat at the counter with my laptop. I needed to stay sharp, to think like the engineer I was. Methodical, precise, one step ahead. I opened the email from Derek again, the one that had confirmed my worst fears. "Once we get the app, we can start over in California." They wanted task flow, my life's work, the app I'd spent years perfecting. I'd poured my soul into that project, working late nights while Lauren slept, debugging code until my eyes burned. And now they thought they could just take it, sell it off, and leave me with nothing. I clenched my jaw, the mug trembling in my hand. Not on my watch. Lauren came down an hour later, her hair still damp from the shower, dressed in a sleek black dress that screamed confidence. "Morning," she said, her voice bright, as if nothing was wrong. She grabbed an apple from the bowl on the counter and took a bite, the crunch echoing in the quiet kitchen. I watched her, my face a mask of calm, but inside, I was a storm. "You're up early," she added, glancing at me as she poured herself a glass of orange juice. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile, the kind I'd perfected over the past few days. "Yeah, just working on some stuff for task flow. The Silicon Valley deal is heating up." Her eyes flickered with interest, just for a moment, before she nodded and looked away. I knew that look. She was calculating, already thinking about how much money she and Derek could get their hands on. "That's great, babe," she said, her tone too sweet, too rehearsed. "You've worked so hard for this." The words sounded hollow, like she was reading from a script. I nodded, sipping my coffee, letting her think I was still the clueless husband she could manipulate. But I wasn't clueless anymore. I'd spent the night digging deeper, and what I'd found had turned my anger into something colder, sharper. The LLC in Seattle that Lauren had been funneling money to, it was registered under Derek's name, but the address tied to it was a cabin in the Cascade Mountains, a place Derek and I used to go fishing years ago. I'd also found a calendar entry on Lauren's laptop, a weekend getaway scheduled for tomorrow at that same cabin. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. They were so sure I'd never suspect a thing that they were planning their little escape right under my nose. I almost laughed at the audacity of it, but the sound caught in my throat, replaced by a bitter taste. I decided to test her. "Hey, I was thinking," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Maybe we should take a weekend trip soon, just the two of us. It's been a while." I watched her closely, noting the way her shoulders tensed, the way her fingers tightened around the glass. "Oh, that sounds nice," she said, but her smile was strained. "But I've got a big event this weekend, catering for a wedding in Seattle. Maybe next month?" I nodded, pretending to buy her excuse, but my mind was racing. Seattle. The cabin wasn't far from there. She was going to meet Derek, probably to finalize their plans for the divorce, and for task flow. That's when I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't confront her yet. I needed more leverage, something to make sure they'd never see me coming. I opened my laptop again, this time logging into my work email. The Silicon Valley firm Apex Innovations had sent me a draft contract for the buyout of TaskFlow. They were offering $5 million with a clause to finalize the deal within 30 days. I'd been holding off, hoping to negotiate a better price, but now I saw an opportunity. I replied to the email asking for an urgent meeting in 2 days. If I could close the deal before Lauren and Derek made their move, I could secure the money and cut them out completely. But I needed to be smart about it. I set up a new offshore account, one they'd never find, and started the paperwork to transfer the funds once the deal was done. Just as I hit send, my phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Hey man, want to grab a beer tonight? Been a while." I stared at the message, my grip tightening on the phone. The nerve of this guy, acting like nothing was wrong, like he wasn't sleeping with my wife and plotting to ruin me. I wanted to drive to his place right then and there, slam my fist into his smug face, and watch him bleed. But I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I typed back, "Sure, sounds good. 7 at McMenamin's?" He replied with a thumbs-up emoji, and I set the phone down, my mind already spinning with a new plan. Tonight, I'd play the part of the oblivious friend. I'd laugh at his jokes, clink glasses, and let him think he had me right where he wanted me. But I'd be watching, listening, waiting for him to slip up. Derek always got sloppy when he drank. Maybe he'd let something useful slip, something I could use against them. I stood up, the rain outside picking up, a steady drumbeat against the windows. I looked at the photo of me and Derek on the wall, taken during a fishing trip years ago, both of us grinning like idiots. I walked over and ripped it down, the frame clattering to the floor. I wasn't that guy anymore. I was someone new, someone who'd fight for what was mine. The neon sign of McMenamin's glowed red against the drizzling Portland night, casting a faint light over the parking lot as I pulled in. I'd chosen this spot on purpose, our old haunt, a brew pub where Derek and I had spent countless nights over the years, sharing beers and dreams. Tonight, though, I wasn't here for nostalgia. I was here to watch him squirm, to see if he'd slip up and give me something I could use. I adjusted my jacket, the USB drive with the security footage tucked in my pocket, and walked inside. The air was thick with the scent of hops and fried food, the hum of conversation blending with the clink of glasses. I spotted Derek at a corner booth, already nursing a pint, his leather jacket slung over the seat. He waved me over, a grin on his face that made my stomach churn. "Hey man, good to see you," Derek said as I slid into the booth. His voice was casual, but his eyes were sharp, watching me like a hawk. I forced a smile, the kind I'd been practicing all day, and nodded. "Yeah, been a while," I replied, signaling the waitress for a beer. I needed to play this smart, keep him talking, let him think I was still the same old Nathan, the guy who'd never suspect his best friend of stabbing him in the back. But every time he laughed, every time he leaned back in his seat like he owned the place, I saw him in my house, his arm around Lauren, and it took everything in me not to lunge across the table and wipe that smirk off his face. We made small talk for a while. Work, football, the usual. I kept my answers short, letting him fill the silence. Derek always loved the sound of his own voice, especially after a few drinks, and tonight was no exception. By his second pint, he was loosening up, his guard slipping just enough for me to steer the conversation where I wanted. "So, how's Lauren doing?" he asked, his tone a little too casual, his fingers tapping the side of his glass. I took a slow sip of my beer, watching him over the rim. "She's been busy," I said, keeping my voice even. "Lots of late nights. You know how it is with her events." Derek nodded, but there was a flicker in his eyes, something between guilt and amusement. "Yeah, she's always been a hard worker," he said, his lips twitching into a half smile. "You're a lucky guy, Nathan." The words hit me like a punch, but I didn't flinch. I leaned back, crossing my arms, and decided to push him. "Funny you say that," I said, my tone light but my eyes locked on his. "I found some weird stuff on our security footage the other night. Someone was in the house while I was out of town. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" His smile froze just for a second, but it was enough. His hand tightened around his glass, and he let out a laugh that sounded more like a cough. "What, you think I'm sneaking into your place?" he said, trying to play it off. But his voice was higher, strained. "Come on, man, that's crazy." I didn't laugh. I didn't move. I just stared at him, letting the silence stretch, letting him feel the weight of my gaze. "I don't know, Derek," I said finally, my voice low. It's funny how things add up sometimes. Like those withdrawals from our account, 20 grand gone. And Lauren's been real secretive lately. You wouldn't happen to know where she's been spending her nights, would you? Derek's face changed then, the mask slipping just enough for me to see the panic underneath. He took a long gulp of his beer, his Adam's apple bobbing, and set the glass down with a thud. "You're paranoid, Nathan," he said, but his words lacked conviction. "Maybe you should talk to Lauren about that. I don't keep tabs on your wife." He tried to laugh again, but it came out hollow, and I knew I'd rattled him. I could have pushed harder, could have pulled out the USB drive and shoved the footage in his face, but I didn't. Not yet. I needed him to think he was still in control, that I was just fishing, not hunting. I changed the subject, letting him relax, but my mind was racing. I'd already set my plan in motion earlier that day. After Lauren left for her event in Seattle, her cover for the cabin trip with Derek, I'd called Apex Innovations and finalized the deal for task flow. $5 million wired to my offshore account by noon tomorrow. I'd also transferred the deed to our house to my brother's name, a move Lauren wouldn't see coming until it was too late. She and Derek thought they'd get half of everything in the divorce, including the app. They were wrong. By the time they realized what I'd done, I'd be untouchable. As we finished our beers, Derek's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, and I caught a glimpse of the screen, Lauren's name, with a heart emoji next to it. My blood ran cold, but I kept my face neutral. "Gotta take this," he said, standing up and stepping outside. I watched him through the window, his back to me, his shoulders tense as he spoke. I couldn't hear him, but I didn't need to. I knew who he was talking to, and I knew what they were planning. What they didn't know was that I'd planted a small tracking device in Lauren's car that morning, a trick I'd learned from a buddy in tech security. I pulled out my phone, opened the app, and watched the little dot on the map. She wasn't in Seattle. She was already at the cabin waiting for Derek to join her. I paid the tab, left a tip, and walked out into the rain. Derek was still on the phone, his voice low, but I caught the tail end of his conversation as I passed by. "He's starting to ask questions," he said, his tone urgent. "We need to move faster." I kept walking, my boots splashing through puddles, a grim smile on my face. They thought they were playing me, but I was playing them. I got in my truck, the engine roaring to life, and pulled out of the lot. Tomorrow, I'd close the deal with Apex. Tomorrow, I'd make sure Lauren and Derek had nothing left to take. The rain poured harder, blurring the city lights, but my path was clear. The morning after my meeting with Derek, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand, the screen lighting up with an email from Apex Innovations. The deal was done. $5 million for task flow, wired to my offshore account at 9:03 a.m. I sat up, the weight of the past few weeks lifting just enough for me to breathe. Lauren and Derek thought they'd get half of everything in the divorce, including the app. They had no idea I'd already sold it, leaving them with nothing to claim. I'd also transferred the deed to our house to my brother's name, a move I'd finalized days ago. They'd walk away empty-handed, and I'd make sure they knew it. I tracked Lauren's car on my phone, the little dot still at the cabin in the Cascade Mountains. She and Derek were probably there now, sipping coffee and plotting their next move, thinking they'd won. I got dressed, pulling on a flannel shirt and jeans, and drove to a coffee shop in downtown Portland where I'd arranged to meet them. I'd texted Lauren earlier, asking her and Derek to join me to discuss the divorce. She'd agreed quickly, probably thinking I was ready to cave. I arrived first, ordering a black coffee and taking a seat by the window. The city buzzed outside, people rushing through the drizzle. But inside, I was calm. I'd spent 15 years building a life with Lauren, 20 years trusting Derek as my best friend. Today, I'd tear it all down and rebuild it on my terms. They walked in 10 minutes later, Lauren in a sleek coat, Derek in his leather jacket, both of them wearing smug smiles. They sat across from me, Lauren crossing her arms, Derek leaning back like he owned the place. "So Nathan," Lauren started, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "let's make this quick. We want to settle the divorce amicably. Half the house, half your assets, and half of task flow's value. That's fair, right?" I took a sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch, watching the confidence in their eyes flicker. "Fair?" I said finally, my voice low, steady. "After you two betrayed me? After you planned to take everything and run off to California?" Their smiles vanished, Lauren's face paling, Derek's jaw tightening. I pulled out my phone, opened the tracking app, and slid it across the table. "You're not in Seattle, Lauren. You've been at the cabin since last night with Derek. I know everything." Lauren's mouth opened, but no words came out. Derek leaned forward, his voice a growl. "You're bluffing, Nathan. You don't have proof." I smirked, pulling the USB drive from my pocket and setting it on the table. "Security footage of you two in my house, emails between you about stealing task flow, and bank records of the $20,000 you funneled to Derek's LLC. I've got it all." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "But here's the best part. I sold task flow yesterday. $5 million wired to an account you'll never find. The house transferred to my brother. You get nothing." Lauren's eyes widened, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. "You can't do that," she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. Derek slammed his fist on the table, drawing stares from nearby customers. "I'll sue you, Nathan. You can't just—" I cut him off, my voice cold. "Sue me with what? You've got no money, no proof, and no case. But I've got something for you." I opened my laptop, turned it toward them, and hit play on a video I'd uploaded to a tech forum last night. A compilation of their emails, texts, and the security footage, all exposing their affair and their plan to steal my app. The post had already gone viral, with thousands of comments calling them out, their names trending for all the wrong reasons. Derek's face turned red, his hands clenching into fists, but he didn't move. Lauren's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of regret, they were tears of fury. "You're a monster," she spat, her voice breaking. I shook my head, standing up. "No, Lauren, I'm just a man who finally saw the truth. You and Derek made your choice. Now live with it." I left the USB drive on the table, walked out, and didn't look back. The rain had stopped, the air crisp and clean, a new beginning hanging in the breeze. A month later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment in downtown Portland, the Willamette River sparkling below under the spring sun. Lauren and Derek had lost everything, their reputations, their careers, their plans. The tech community had blacklisted Derek after the scandal, and Lauren's event planning business collapsed when clients dropped her. They'd even turned on each other, their love crumbling under the weight of their failure. I'd heard through a mutual friend that Derek had moved to some nowhere town in Idaho, and Lauren was back with her parents, broke and alone. I'd started a new company, Next Wave Solutions, with the money from the task flow sale. It was small but growing fast, and I'd built a team I could trust, people who'd never stab me in the back. I sipped my coffee, the warmth spreading through me, and opened my laptop to write a blog post about my journey. "Betrayal cuts deep," I typed, "but it doesn't have to define you. I lost my wife and my best friend, but I found something better, myself. Don't let anyone steal your worth. Fight for what's yours, and live better than they ever dreamed." I hit publish, knowing my story would resonate with anyone who'd ever been burned by the people they loved. The sun climbed higher, painting the city in gold. I was 42, starting over, but I'd never felt stronger. This was my life now, and I'd write the ending my way. As I stood on my balcony, watching the sun set over the Willamette River, I realized how far I'd come. Betrayal stings, but it doesn't have to break you. It can build you stronger. I learned to trust my gut, to fight for what's mine, and to never let anyone dim my worth. To anyone out there feeling shattered by those you loved, know this: you're enough, and you can rise above. What would you do if your best friend turned on you? Have you ever had to rebuild after a heartbreak? Drop a comment. I'd love to hear your story. If this video touched your heart, hit that subscribe button for more stories of grit and redemption. Let me know where you're watching from, or just type 1 if you're ready to take back your power. See you in the next one. If this story resonated with you, don't just keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful stories, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters, and I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.